All right. Hey, good morning. It's a brand new week. It's July's flying away, right? So life just keeps going on. Hope you guys had a great weekend. We we had a good one. Did a little work, had a little fun, and just enjoyed the weekend. And so here we are jumping into Luke again. And so that's where we're going to be for today. So we're in chapter 3, and really excited about moving into this. Now, I have a tendency to kind of geek out when it comes to just deep dive and studying, and so you would think that Luke 3 would be pretty straightforward, and we'd just rock through it. But Luke gives us some historical context, and so the reason why he's doing that, I believe, is to show us a little bit of just the oppression that's taking place. If you kind of dive into the 7 names that he mentions here from a historical perspective, um, there's nothing godly or holy about any of it. They're all just suppressors and brutal people. And so I'm going to remind us again of the travel of Jerusalem, of the Israelis to this place. So when we get to chapter 3, let's just read the first 3 verses. It says this: Now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, and Herod was tetrarch of Galilee, and his brother Philip was tetrarch of the region of Bithynia, and Trachonitis, and Lysanias was tetrarch of Abilene, in the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, the son of Zechariah, in the wilderness. So that's our setting. That's what we're looking at. And we're just going to kind of break this down. So it's been 18 years between Luke chapter 2 and the last verse of that to this section here. 18 years fast forward. Last we saw Jesus, he was 12 years old, and he was in the temple learning and questioning and astounding everybody with his knowledge and insight. Both are approximately 30 years old. John is 6 months older than Jesus. They both play a key role, and we've spent the first 2 chapters, really, Luke does, of developing the prophecy surrounding those 2 men, the birth of those 2 men, and then just a glimpse at Jesus' life. So that's where we now find ourselves. So Luke is setting a historical timeline. Why? Because, well, he's an investigative journalist, and so he's wanting to set the stage for his friends who will read this, and no doubt, in some sense, hoping that it would serve as a document through the ages, which it obviously has. And there's much truth to be found in that. So Matthew says that John the Baptist was the greatest prophet that has ever lived. He is the last we would consider the last of the Old Testament prophets. Moving forward, the prophets will be in the New Testament vein. Jesus, being a prophet himself, bridges that gap. But this is the last of the Old Testament prophets, those who are looking forward to the Messiah. And calling Israel to live a holy life. That was the role of the prophet, to speak forth what God was going to do if you did well, what was going to happen if you did wrong. In some sense, the prophets would give us a future glimpse into what was coming, even from a messianic perspective. So they would prophesy something that was specific to that time, and then also, like Isaiah, would peer into the New Testament when he spoke of Jesus and all of that. So it says here, the setting, it says, now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. So let's just look at that for a minute and kind of get our bearings of, of what the timeline was on this. So it's the 15th year of Caesar, of Tiberius Caesar's reign. Now he's the son-in-law of Caesar Augustus, and he's also in line with Julius Caesar. Augustus died, according to Roman deal, the equivalent of our August the 19th AD 14. So if we add 15 years to that, we come to 29 AD when John the Baptist began to speak. There's some discrepancy to that, and I've been taking this course on ancient Christianity, and so you know it's been really good for me. But there was a co-reign before Augustus passed away. He had a co-reign with Tiberius to entrench his lineage into the king, so to speak, of Rome, and so he co-reigned from AD 11. So depending on what he means by in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius, it's either 26 AD or 29 AD. Now, not to get all bogged down in that, I just think it's important that we understand that this is a historical account. This isn't a fable. We're not talking about Frodo and all of these other things that you would see in other fables. This is true history, giving the account of the time frame in which this is done. I do wonder whether it's so much a time frame as it is to show the reality of where they are. If you were to study the intertestamental documents, Maccabees and some of the others, you'll see that there was an onslaught from Rome of brutality. They would take over the temple on occasion. They would set up shop in the temple. They were just disregarding anything religious that had to do with the Jews. It was the constant strain on them. You need to feel that. So that when James and John, the sons of thunder, the zealots, came in to become the apostles of Jesus, those were men who were known as zealots. They were Jews who were like, we've had enough, and we are going to overthrow Rome. And so they were set up. They were revolutionaries in that sense, and they were zealots. Some would argue that they were terrorists in that sense. I'm not speaking of James and John specifically, but that the zealots were that. But at any rate, Tiberius was a brutal Caesar. He deported. He loved to deport the Jews, to transplant them, to move them different places. He would bring them to Rome. He would put them on trial. In the last few days of his life, he had dementia, but still ruled, and the dementia only brought out an evil side of him, and so there was just great brutality that was taking place from Rome toward the Jews specifically because of them being Jews and not Gentiles. And so we could go a lot deeper in that. I just want to give you what's going on. So that kind of sets the setting. They are in Rome. Listen, the Abrahamic covenant of the land, it's not theirs right now. They had it. They lost it because of their own idolatry, because of their own disobedience to God, and he caused them to be overrun in the 700 and 800 period, this northern and the southern. So about 800 years before this, they lost that land that God had blessed them with. They don't have a king. They lost those too. So the Davidic covenant is no longer in. They have no king. They have these little mock kings that we're going to look at, and they're not even Jewish. So they don't have that either. They've lost really everything, and they're being brutalized, and they're being put down. And what is God's nation is, or God's people rather, is really just a shell of that. And so it's important that we see that, because I want us to feel the desperation of the people as Luke begins to continue on with this story. So then it says, then it was Tiberius is the reign of all of Rome. Pontius Pilate is the governor of Judea. Now that's the region where Jerusalem is. And Pontius Pilate came into power in 26 AD, about the same time of this 15th year reign, so to speak. He's kind of new at that, but Pontius Pilate will be there all the way through Jesus' crucifixion. He's a real figure. In 1961, as archaeologists were digging in Caesarea, they found a building named the Tiberium after Tiberius, and on that plaque it was devoted to Tiberius, and it mentioned that Pontius Pilate, his name, because he was ruler of that time when that was built. And so he was a wicked, evil man as well, and I don't want to bore you with all the history, but he was a brutal man too. Then we say, and it says he comes to Herod, who was a tetrarch of Galilee. That's kind of a king. It's a little form of a king. They're straw men. They're put there. They don't really have great power. They're just put there to kind of keep everything intact, so to speak. And so there's three of those. There's Herod, who was in Galilee. His brother Philip, who was in the region of Aitunia and Trachonitis, and then Lysanias, who was tetrarch of Abilene. And so these are the three. There are three regions. They just each have a king. You could call them a mayor, but they're a king of that sense, and that's who they are. Now, Herod, the one that's mentioned here, is the son of Herod the Great. This is Herod Antipas. He was an evil idolater. He loved to put idols in the temple and all of those things. And so you see that just over and over again all through what was taking place. This is the man who chopped John's head off. So this is who he was in that region. And so it's a fragmented land. You've got different kings over different areas. Galilee has their king. Judea has their king. And then Abilene has kind of has their king. And so it's just this hodgepodge of things, so to speak. All of these Gentiles, and all of them are wicked. And so they are being ruled by this brutality, and they feel it. So a tetrarch was kind of a low-ranking king, and so because of that, there's a boss that's that annoying little boss that just wants to force his power, and then there's his boss who's less likely to do that, but the underling is the one who kind of flexes their muscles and tries to act like they're somebody. That's what these tetrarchs were. That's what Herod was. And so they were uncircumcised Gentiles, power-hungry minions who went around doing evil and taunting the Jews constantly. So feel the oppression that the Jews have, because this is going to be the dawn of that awakening out of that oppression from a spiritual perspective, and this is what you and me care about. Now he goes on to say, and the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas. Now Caiaphas was the high priest. Annas was the older. And he was also a high priest, much like when you have a president like Trump or Carter, Obama. They still are called Mr. President, right? And so even though Biden is now our president, they're considered president also. So Annas was considered that. But much like what happens in politics today, Caiaphas has the name, but Annas still carries the weight. And so that's what's going on. Within that framework, and understand, these are not priests that are in the line of Levi. So these aren't even proper priests for the people. No. Rome shook that up too, because a priest came from the line in the tribe of Levi. But these aren't that. These are appointed. The high priest was then appointed by Rome. You can see the corruption, can't you? You can see what's taking place. To be under Rome is no different than they were under the Persians and the Greeks and every nation that came before them. Babylon, all of those were persecutors like that, kind of destroying culture, if you will, of the people. That's why Daniel was pulled out from the nation. They would leave some in, they would pull some out. That's why they were all given different names. They were told to eat different foods. Why? And they were learning languages because they wanted to develop a culture, a new culture in Daniel's day. Same thing happening here. So these priests weren't even true priests. Along with that, you had the Pharisees. These were the legalistic type. They were really trying to hold Israel together. There was a purpose behind them. They just weren't legalistic and hypocritical for no reason. They really wanted Israel to stand out. They didn't want Rome to take over, and so they were determined that if we just kept the law, that they would have no more reign over us than they do now. So it was there was a little bit of that. The Sadducees, they were, if we were to call them, they were the liberal deal. They didn't believe in supernaturals. They didn't believe in angels. They didn't believe in resurrections. They just believed dead was dead, life was life. That was it. And so there was some morality about them. So within that whole context of the temple, then Ananias and Caiaphas found a way to make money, which is why Jesus turned the tables over twice in the temple. So they had the money changers, and so what you would do is you had Roman money, and it had the picture of Caesar on it. So that's idolatry, right? So you couldn't take that and give it as a tax or as an homage in the temple, because you were doing idolatry. So you would go to the money changers and say, I need to exchange this coin for our Jewish coins. Well, they were going to stick you with that. That was where they were going to make their money. That's why Jesus turned over those things, because it was just, they had made God's house a den of thieves. That's what he calls it. That's why. So understand, that's what's going on. It has crept into every fiber of the Jewish life. They were destined to be to have this drift apart from a true relationship with the God that they knew of in the Old Testament. The sacrificial system, the same way. They would find a blemish on your sacrifice, and then they would say, "Oh, but I'll trade you out." And so they give you a lamb, they take yours, they cover the blemish up, throw it in the pen with the others, and it cycles like that every time. This was the evil that was taking place, and this is what Luke is letting us know when he writes that first phrase, which gives us then to coming to verse 3. Or the end of verse 2. So it says this. Now let's read it again. Now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, Herod was tetrarch of Galilee, brother was tetrarch the region of Itunia and Trachonitis, and Lysanias was tetrarch of Abilene, the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas. That's given us that background, and we saw it's all meant to show the evil brutality of the people. It's a dark time. It is the darkest before dawn. So this is the darkest times that Israel has faced as a people. And then it says, in the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, then it says this, the word of God came to John, son of Zechariah, in the wilderness. Now, let's just think about that for a minute. That phrase, the word of the Lord came, is a word that if you just took the time to wander through the New Testament, you would see it was stated almost at every, I think it was actually, at every prophet in the Old Testament. In Genesis 15:1, it says the word of the Lord came to Abraham, right, who began this whole nation. In 1 Samuel, the word of the Lord came to Samuel, and he began to speak. The word of the Lord came to Nathan. In 2 Samuel, he began to speak. 1 Kings, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. If you keep going, the word of the Lord came to Elisha, to all of those, all of the prophets that was given. And so here, that statement, the word of the Lord came, signifies John in line with all of the other prophets. And so John has spent his time out in the wilderness. Now, what that means is you're in the Judean mountains, which are kind of between the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River, and it's east of that, and where the mountains begin to head toward the sea, it's just this barren area, and so it was called wilderness. It's a desert. You think wilderness, sometimes we think of a forest, like a barren wilderness, meaning filled with nothing but trees. This is more of a desert-like setting. It's where Jesus went. It's where John grew up. Literally, whether that meant he grew up as a baby there or not, we don't know, but he grew up in the wilderness and he lived there. He had camel hair clothing. He ate locusts and honey. He was a wild man, much like the other prophets. Elijah and all of them come from the same ilk. And so this is who he was. And it says, the word of the Lord came to John, the son of Zechariah, in the wilderness. That's as far as we're going to get today. But now we've set the scene, and we'll be ready for in the morning. Man, Lord bless you guys. Have a great day. Can't wait to see you and share more with you in the morning.